facilities of the school district want and need. And then we actually came up with a quantitative priority. We put a number to these, basically. And they're listed up here. Obviously, the higher priority at the top, as well as a little bit lesser priority towards the bottom. I'll just give it a few minutes for folks to take a look at that. I'm not going to go through each separate category, but this is our thought process of how to bring projects, as well as how this would equate to our recommendation overall. That.
Alright, so after our tours, we talked about different options and projects that we thought would benefit our school district. I won't read them all, if you want to take a look. At the elementary school, really is just adding some space in there. Middle school needs a lot of updating. High school, just reworking some space. And the admin building. So what we did, after we figured out these ideas that we wanted, we put them into this matrix, placing them in the highest urgency and the most value. And what we came up with was basically the ones that we thought were the highest priority right now would be to expand the high school and vacating the middle school. And then the rest of the projects just weren't as high on the urgency list.
So now this is what our group is here for. Our recommendation, so of all the people that are there, we discussed, and our final meeting, we had 100% consensus about what our recommendation was. So based off of what Audrey had presented in the Eisenhower matrix, we came up with 4 different categories. So we came up with the urgent and most important, which is, more of our health and safety things and looking at the budget. Important and prudent, things that we thought are important but not quite meeting that other level. And then enhancements that are on the radar, good for students, but maybe doesn't have that health or safety component. And then things for consideration, things that we had talked about that we just wanted to throw in there for you guys. So the urgent and most important was, these were our main recommendation, would be to expand the high school to include grades 4 through 8, to vacate the middle school and to vacate the administration building and possibly use some of that existing space to relocate our administrative staff. We said they have a large overflow area there, they have a lot of unused space, can we utilize that for administration, get them back into the schools? And then also by vacating the middle school and vacating the admin building, we're lowering our overhead costs too. And that was, I think, what we thought was good for students, fiscally responsible, and possibly to get the community support, was to get out of those buildings. And then a thing, so if those buildings were closed, then to look at where are we going to make sure there's space for and facilities for the grounds and the maintenance. There's a lot that goes into that, considering right here, like we said, the loading dock is here, there's community space here. Where would all of that go? So next up would be the important things, to expand the elementary kitchen and cafeteria, and then additional storage at the elementary. However, if you took the 4th grade out of the elementary school and put them into that addition, 4 through 8, onto the high school, and you can call it a middle school or intermediate school, would we really need to do these then? Because we have 1 less grade at the elementary school, so we free up those classrooms. There wouldn't be as many kids going through the lunchroom, so would we necessarily need a larger or an expanded kitchen and cafeteria, or the additional storage if we had that additional room? And then also, kind of in with that is the elementary loading dock and kitchen storage. I mean, if there wasn't a loading dock here, it probably would still be beneficial to add something to the elementary school so they can at least get a pallet into the kitchen. But again, taking the 4th grade out of the middle school and then putting it into the high school would alleviate some of the space concerns. And then also, by doing it at the high school, the elementary, you wouldn't have to update the sprinkler system as you would in the elementary school. that we think would be beneficial would be when you go into the high school where the, like their staff in the front office are, it's a secure entryway, everything is great with it, but sometimes the secretaries can't see out that window. So do we maybe need to update that a little bit? Expand the CTE, the shop classes out there, like we said when we did the tour. We have a lot of room there, but those areas were a little bit more confined. And the same thing with the culinary program out there. As more came into the elementary school, they did have to get rid of their maker space and things got condensed into the library, so would it be possible to maybe expand the library a little bit, bring back that maker space, address the elementary parking lot concerns? Again, would that be needed if we had the fourth graders go? That's, you know, something for you guys to consider. And then adding the early childhood and the childcare options, if there was available room for that. And then expanding the high school special education areas as well. So things that we had just talked about, and we just wanted to throw out there for you guys, would be reworking part of the middle school to keep the gym available, or maybe moving the district offices over there, to maybe make a community hub in the high school or the middle school. And then, like we said, there is a lot of those teacher pods and also the computer labs over there. Can we rework that area to make it a little bit more efficient for classrooms or for collaborative learning spaces? Just to rework some of that. And then, should the middle school be closed, looking at the athletic field, the support areas, the locker rooms, and then the storage too, would probably need to be addressed as well. So I talked really fast, and that was a lot. So we'll have time at the end, you know, if you want to have any questions on that. So again, we understand that, you know, we appreciate that you open this up to us in the community so we could give our recommendation, and we know we're just a very small part of what you guys consider, but we put a lot of hours in, and we really hope it's been helpful for you to hear what we've come up with and to just get our input out there for the community. We're always here if you need anything in the future you need. And then we always just go back to, throughout our thing, it's for the kids, and we want to do what's best for them. So we hope that what our recommendation was reflected in what we thought was best for the kids. I also want to thank everybody from Site Logic too. They did a great job of giving us the framework and the information for us to come up with our own recommendations. They were great at, they always kept saying, we're not here to tell you what to do, and they didn't. They just gave us the information and the guidance to make sure that we made an informed decision and we could come to you guys with this. And they were up yesterday at 5:30 in the morning going through our presentation with us, so we appreciate Pat and Tom back there and everybody else from Site Logic who came. So if you guys have any questions, you can open it up to the entire task force. If there's anything that you want us to elaborate on.
Question from the board? Laura?
Why would you have to vacate this admin building?
Well, we were looking at just generally overall reducing overhead costs and considering the number of people who are in this building and the little it's used, I mean, it's used for meeting spaces, but could we address it in a different way? We could really reduce overhead costs if this building was closed.
Couldn't you put some of the grade school or the middle school children in this building?
I think the amount of repairs, we kind of thought, and this is for our task force too, the amount of repairs that would need to be done to this building and the roof and the maintenance and the tower, would it be in the long run beneficial for it to be putting more money into this building? Or could we put money into a new one, a new add-on to it, an addition onto the high school, which would, essentially we're spending money, but overall we'd be saving by closing two schools that need a lot of repair, or two buildings that need a lot of repairs done to them. Did I sum that up okay? Oh, we're talking, well, the middle school and the admin building are our two oldest buildings in the district, so.
The overall thought process was just trying to reduce the footprint of the school district, you know, from 4 buildings to 2, maybe 3, and that would equate to operational savings in the long run. That's the short and sweet answer.
Is there a way for you to explain exactly what you're meaning by adding on to the high school, what that would look like?
I can attempt to
Well,
answer that.
was this
Just
more
some
a
of
board
it, I
decision?
understand there's a lot.
So we were told that was more of a board decision. We were just giving our recommendations as to what we thought would be appropriate. I think that would be something that you probably talk about with Michael and Tom and the rest of the team, the specifics of that. Right, I don't wanna not address it, but
I think that it's important for anyone that maybe is watching this online or is here, is that when you say moving these children to the high school, they're not interacting with the kids in the high school, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, yes,
I want you
yes.
to explain that part of it, because I think that's a very
That is,
important part.
that's correct, yes. They wouldn't be interacting with the high school students. This would be a separate wing for these classes. And I would suspect, I believe we were speaking with the middle school teachers as well, that the recommendation was grades 4 through 8 to go to this wing, but there's even subdivisions subdivisions within those grades as well, as far as the interaction or lack thereof. So yes, it wouldn't just be a large conglomerate of the whole school. It would be a separate wing.
Yeah.
We did not dive into details as far as design and structure. That's not really in our charge and our wheelhouse.
I mean, as much as we wanted to, we tried. We were like, okay, here's where we're gonna put it, and here's what we're gonna do. And then they said, well, that seems like a board decision, so we had to rein it in a little bit. But yeah, it would have its own entrance. It would not be, and right now, the middle school does a great job, and maybe Mrs. Hall will put her on the spot, but our 5th grade is kind of self-contained in its own area, and the 6th grade, it would be very similar to that. Like, 4th grade would be in its own, that's why we said maybe an intermediate school, because middle school sounds very intimidating. When you think about putting your little 4th grader there, you're like, oh. But that would kind of be the thought behind it.
What did you discuss when it came to safety and security? By putting this addition on, anything?
Can you repeat the question?
What did you discuss when it came to safety and security as a group? Can you share that, or was that just considered a board?
Yeah, I can address it. We did look at the safety and security, and that was on the forefront of our minds. Based on the world that everybody knows that we exist in today. So that is priority one. Currently, the 3 schools, the elementary, the middle school, and the high school felt, and we saw it, that the security was adequate. I'm just going to say adequate at this time. Did it meet the current standards? No, because these buildings were built decades prior. But from the staff, we understood that it was adequate. There was some improvements in a few areas, specifically the high school that we were informed of, and that was part of our recommendation. I don't know if any other members of the task force want to elaborate.
When we went to the middle school, we were looking at all those doors, and we had a long talk about doors and windows, and that with safety issues at the middle school.
Can you hear her?
No.
A little bit.
Yeah. Teresa had just said that when we were at the middle school, there was a lot more talk about safety. Some of those doors weren't able to have the automatic locks on them, and then there's some of the window concerns. So I think that was maybe where more of our health and safety concerns were, was at the middle school.
And also the AD.
Oh, and the AD, yeah. Did that answer your question about before, about the 4th through 8th?
I'd like to add one thing too. Everything that I was just addressing was the main entrances going in and out of the schools. As far as other internal concerns, Aaron just addressed that.
I guess I'm wondering about the doors. I know that in many cases that funding can come to the schools if they're trying to get bulletproof doors on the outside of the building, but it does not usually cover any inner doors. Now, I know at the high school, you're coming in through your first doors, and then you have another set of doors, and then you have the window that looks into the office. So was there a discussion then, when you were talking about safety, of making those more, what do I want to say, more like bulletproof? I hate to use the word bulletproof, but I mean something that's more set up to protect anyone being able to get into the school.
Yes, we did consider it. In fact, I'm trying to, I'd have to go back in the notes to consider it, but I do believe that the school district has already made improvements regarding film that was installed on some of the entrance doors.
Crystal,
For
can
that
you,
purposes, I'm seeing some,
Crystal,
So, I don't know all the technical terms, and I don't know all the current standards, but it's not just a standard door anymore because of these films that I don't know are considered totally bulletproof, but maybe a better.
But shatterproof.
Maybe bullet resistance, resistant is best, and I believe that.
Crystal can probably explain a little bit better. We got a grant maybe 7 or so years ago.
In 2018, there was a push from the Department of Justice for some grants for school safety. So our school exterior doors have 3M film on them for shatter resistance to withhold bullets for a certain number of minutes to get law enforcement there. It is only the exterior doors.
Right.
Because you have to be able to also meet fire requirements, so you cannot do windows, you have to be able to get out of the classrooms. So that film is on the exterior doors only, which is why they had some concern about the high school, because someone has to physically already be in the building for the secretaries to see them and let them in. They're past that film already. And
Thank you.
So with your numbers that you had, we're looking at potential 20-year payback if this would ever go through? Is that the max we can, is 20 years?
Yeah, I think if I recall, and I'm not.
that's not for us to decide, right? Yeah, I don't think that's in our wheelhouse.
The numbers that we show were
We had
20 years.
School bonds are historically
Yeah, that would be, yeah.
20-year bonds. That's historically what they are, so.
Is there anything else from the board? All right, I think, thank you.
Thank you very
Task
much.
force.
All of you, thank you.
All right, we can move on to Site Logic Project Management Report.
We'll just take a couple minutes recess while we're.
Sure, because it's gonna take,
Yeah,
we'll swap out the machines.
Not a cough drop, but it helps. Sometimes I have cough.
Oh, well, yeah. And the cold.
Yeah, that's true.
Is that why I'm shivering? Is that why I'm shivering?
Yeah, I've got my hands are cold, I'm like, why?
I thought it was just me.
Yeah, sometimes like change. They're breathing and uncomfortable. I don't know that I need the window open.
Thank you for noticing that, I'm like, why am I chilling?
So is it in the school board section? I just want to we're in a break. I just want to let people know, I see people taking their cameras and trying to capture individual slides. Nicole's already loaded the first presentation onto our website. So we'll have the second presentation loaded onto the website shortly as well. So you don't need to capture the slides with your phones. We don't have it, but as soon as we have it, we'll put it up.
You guys are ready?
Yeah.
I think we're ready to roll.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much for having us in tonight. And I'd like to really thank the Community Task Force for the huge amount of time and effort that they've spent in terms of really diving into school finances, into the needs of the district, into huge amounts of information and data just to kind of dissect all of that and put forward a recommendation. And so tonight, this is what we would describe as our first workshopping. It's really about how do we take that recommendation, how do we turn it into reality, how do we turn this community-driven charge into something that's actually practicable, not just for the now, but in terms of best preparing the district for the future, reducing your overall operating spend, making sure that you have the best facilities for the students and at the same stage, taking a step on a journey to really getting back onto a good position for the district. So, did I put the wrong one? No, there we go. Thanks. Wanted to get you up. So tonight we're going to go through what's the outcomes that we're looking to achieve from our first workshop. We'll look at some of the ideas and opportunities that we have available to us. We're going to look at the community feedback and the survey results as well. Touch on some of those financial information pieces. I can certainly dive a lot deeper into that. And then our real goal tonight is to try and workshop into a consensus on what is an appropriate dollar amount as we go forward towards a potential referendum. So, like I said, workshop one, the goal tonight in the orange there is to try and reach consensus as a school board on what is an appropriate dollar amount so that we can then best serve that with the most value in terms of improvements to the district. Workshop two becomes that process of actually selecting the projects that fit into that amount. When we talk about referenda, there are really two approaches to how we go about choosing what that scope and what that budget is. We talk about it as needs up or budget down. Needs up means that we look at everything within the district. As you guys know, we've completed assessments across all of the different buildings. We've looked at all of the different infrastructural things. We've looked at all the different programmatic options. How can we reduce capacity? What are the right additions? In a needs-up approach, what we do is we look at all of those things. You choose which ones you think are appropriate. We add them all up. We come up to a number. In a budget-down approach, this is much more representative of how your community is feeling. So we look at the data that we have. We look at the community survey data, which Tom will take us through in a few minutes. We come up with a number that we feel is fiscally responsible to your community, and then we prioritize what we're able to do in terms of the best improvements for that. We're always looking at trying to triangulate a few different things up here. What are the infrastructural needs that your existing buildings require in order to continue to operate in a healthy fashion? In your instance, what are the programming needs, mainly driven by a building that has an awful lot of infrastructural needs in middle school? And then, of course, what is the voice of the community? What is likely to be supported, and what are the recommendations that have come from your school district? Just like the Community Task Force, we're always trying to answer three different questions. Is this correct for the students and staff? Is it correct for the community? And is it financially correct? Okay? By the end of tonight, again, I want you to have these questions in the back of your mind as we move through this. And we should be able to say yes, yes, and yes. Like, this feels like it's the right thing to do by our students. It feels like the right thing to do by our community. And it feels like it's the right financial implication on our community too. So Tom, I will pass across to Tom, who again was helping support the Community Task Force, but he's going to talk through the community survey results.
Okay, as you know, we had a community-wide got a survey out from October 10th to January 5th, just a couple days ago. All right, so it was open for a considerable amount of time there. We got a good number of responses early on, kind of waned for a little bit, and then the district provided, again, information out there, social media, flyers. I believe there may have been a newspaper ad for it, a variety of different ways to access that survey. In total, we had about 485 responses, which comes out to about 4% of the people in your district. That seems like a low number, but once we hit 4%, statistically, it's an accurate number. We did look at what some of the data was about halfway through, and then when we compare that to what it was at the end, you don't see a lot of change, in particular after you hit about that 4% mark. So even though that sounds light statistically, it's a very decent number. So just diving into the data, and I'll go through fairly quickly here. Certainly feel free to ask some questions if you want. Just some of the demographic information here that we take a look at. The highest number of responses we got were from 35 to 44-year-olds. Not, again, atypical. This is a very typical graph, if you will, of what the ages of respondents were. Most of your parents are in that 35 to 44-year-old range, and that's why those numbers are typically higher. Where do you live? Most of your responses came from Adams. You can kind of see the rest of the different areas within your district that they come from. You had about 5% of your respondents that came from outside of the district. I apologize, I don't have my glasses on, so I'm going to cheat by looking at this screen occasionally. But you have about 5% of your responses came from people outside of the district. People may ask why. Either they happened to see the survey and they answered it, but most often those are families who open and enroll into your district. In a number of the questions, we do not include some of those responses if you live outside of the district, just so that we're taking a fair look at what some of those responses are. From a parent standpoint, we often look at are you a parent or not a parent, because sometimes our priorities are very different when it comes to schools relative to whether we're parents or not. You had 56% of your respondents that are parents. This is a pretty typical graph again. In reality, only about 1/3 of your voting public are parents. And so in particular, when we get to some of the financial data, we make some adjustments to make sure that the non-parents that are in that survey or represented in that survey are fairly represented. We ask parents where their kids go to school. Again, here we just want to see a balance amongst the different grade levels within that, so that if we had 60% of the people responding were from high school kids, we could then assume that perhaps we're leaning into needs that the high school might have versus the middle school or the elementary school. So you've got a very balanced response here. We took a look at, we're not going super deep tonight. This survey was done early on in the process, so we didn't have the ability to survey based on things that the community task force talked about and that type of thing. This is really a high-level survey at the beginning of this process. But what you can see with the different colors here, there's a whole bunch of different types of scope and projects that we surveyed on. The different colors here represent kind of the location of the schools that they correspond with. So the green bars that you see at the top there, which is replacing outdated fire alarms and updates for secure entryways and failing exterior doors where needed, those types of things. Those are the green bars that you see. Those are district-wide type projects. The blue bars there are elementary school related. So some of the top ones there is just the roofing at the elementary school, air handling systems, and restroom needs at that location. The yellow ones that you see are the high school level issues. You'll only see two bars represented there, not a lot of needs, as you heard from the community task force at the high school. And then the red ones that you see there are related to the middle school. And so one thing that we noted there, I guess, is that, you know, the district-wide things that are listed there, like say security, very high scoring, whereas a number of the things from the middle school, and I'll come back around this at the end, but a number of things from the middle school standpoint, you know, we're more towards the bottom of support, and then, you know, the high school and elementary school are pretty well scattered amongst that list. The survey did ask the question, would you support consolidated in the middle and the high schools? Okay, and so from this standpoint here, you can kind of see that yellow or red or orangish looking line there down the middle. That's the 50% mark. And so you've got more than half of the survey respondents suggesting that they would support, and I believe the question talked a little bit about operating cost and enrollment as well, but would support taking a look at consolidated in the middle and the high schools. This is broken out by age, just to understand a little bit better where these answers are coming from. They're fairly even there. The 45 to 54-year-olds end up being the most supportive of that at 73%. The 25 to 34-year-olds, the least supportive at 58%, which is the top one there, but all over 50%. Also asked about consolidating administrative offices in order to be more efficient with the use of your space. And in this case here, you can see there's a considerable amount of support for looking at that as an option. Everybody well into the 80% there. Energy efficiency projects, spending some money to reduce operating budget by being more energy efficient. Again, here, quite considerable support on that. Your 25 to 34-year-olds are out there at 87% in support of that. The least is 69, 70% of the 55 to 64-year-olds. So I will tell you, looking at a lot of these surveys, when we see anything that's pushing that far past 50% is something that is generally very supported. We don't see that all that often. We did ask a couple questions about tax impact and what the tolerance. Again, this question was asked without any context, right? So it's kind of a tough question for a survey taker to answer and say, hey, you know, do you want your taxes raised? You know, and by how much? You know, and of course, the first answer is no, right? Nobody wants their taxes raised. But then the follow-up question is for what? You know, what are we doing? And so there's not a lot of context to that data. But when you take a look at this, and this is where we break it down between parents and non-parents, all right? And then we combine those scores. And we represent the parents' answer to this question at about 1/3. And the non-parents from a 2/3 standpoint, okay? And so you can kind of see the difference there between what the responses are. I'll give you just a quick rundown because I'm sure you can't read that all that well, although maybe you have the PowerPoint in front of you. The red on the far right-hand side is none. I want no tax increase at all. The green on the other end is 22 million or more. And everything else is broken down in about $4 million increments between those two things. And so what this shows here is that from a calculation standpoint, simply based on 50% required to pass a referendum, that somewhere in that neighborhood of about $14 million, again, without context, is something that people would at least be willing to look at, okay? Not suggesting that it would pass necessarily. It has a lot to do with what it's for. But Again, that's kind of where this shakes out relative to the survey respondents. We also take a look at it from an age standpoint. And so the gray box is 14 million in the survey. That was one of the answers that was provided. And so you can see that red line, or that 50% mark, runs mostly through the gray boxes at that 14 million. When you look at your 45 to 54-year-olds, they're tending up into that, what would that be, 18 million, I believe, yep, 18 million. They're tending very close to that $18 million mark. However, when you get to the 55 to 64-year-olds, and I'm not sure why, right there at that break point, that decade, we drop considerably back, but your 54 to 64-year-olds are, at least relative to the survey, the least supportive of tax dollars going to make potential improvements to the district. Again, it relates a lot, though, at the end of the day, to what the scope would be. All right, so that gives us an idea of where folks are at. And of course, we can disaggregate by lots of different things. So if there are, at some point, as you're going through some workshopping and that type of thing, you want to take a look at some other data, we can certainly try to provide that data. We also had comments and feedback available for folks to provide at various points. And so what we did is we disaggregated out, we got comments on all kinds of things. For purposes of what we're talking about here tonight, we disaggregated out those comments that were relative to facilities and infrastructure types of things, and then broke it out between the elementary, middle, and high school, the buildings. So primarily the positives are on the green side, and some of the concerns are, again, on the gray area. And you can take a look at those and read those, but aging infrastructure, space limitations, insufficient modernization were some of the comments or concerns around the elementary school. Also had some good positive comments there. Middle school there, concerns about outdated equipment, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, those types of things. Layout is seen as inefficient, doesn't meet current safety and accessibility standards. And I'm not suggesting that these comments are correct. These are representative of the comments that came back from the survey. We did see a number of comments in the survey talking about that fourth bullet point there, renovating the middle school would not be cost effective and not necessarily beneficial in the long run. So that's the middle school and the high school. Again, some nice comments there, recent updates on some of the equipment, HVAC and that type of thing. The idea that some of that stuff is outdated, I think, is anticipating that based on how old the building is. But again, the comments relative to the high school are similar to the elementary school. And I think that's it on the survey. I'm happy to answer any questions, so if you want to take a fair look at the data. So,
Board have anything?
nothing else?
Nothing today.
Okay, and I'll be hanging around, so if it comes back up later, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll be flicking back and forth as we kind of go through this, just to reference some of those different pieces, especially the tax impacts, and especially kind of that level of support for different aspects of the project. I wanted just to make sure, again, that you guys are familiar with the process that we've gone through, and really starting with just what are the conditions of those different buildings as they stand at the moment. So both the elementary and the high school have been maintained in a really excellent fashion. Nick, who is our development engineer back then, if there was something in that building that was causing him concern, he would find it, and normally he would put a large number to it. But the middle school is really your main risk factor, right? It's an old building, we know that. It requires a lot of maintenance. As Tom said within the community survey, lots of comments to say, please don't put money into this building. We know that this building is, we're putting good money after bad in terms of trying to maintain it. You have about 40% of that building that's in alert and alarm condition, but a large chunk of it is in what we would call caution condition. So about 90% of that building is likely to come up in the next 10 to 15 years. So a significant investment in that building really is just patching a broken leg rather than necessarily dealing with the underlying issue. The other piece is that the building is way bigger than we need at this stage. You know, we looked at those declining enrollment trends, we looked at probably where the plateau is going to be. The community task force recognizes it too. You have a lot of space within the middle school and high school. You have a crunch at the elementary. We really shouldn't be trying to replicate and continue to pay the large utility costs, insurance costs, and everything else that's kind of that comes alongside that in middle school. As we look at it from a slightly deeper level, this is the picture of your elementary school. In that pie chart, you can see that there's about a fifth of the building that's in alert and alarm condition. This is a perfect picture for us, so we support lots and lots of school districts. We don't want to see everything in excellent, acceptable, and caution, and the reason being is if you want a cyclical investment pattern. If everything is in excellent, everything comes up at the same stage. So to see something like this actually is a really good pattern for you, and I'll call out Sean, who I think is doing an excellent job in terms of maintaining these spaces. This is absolutely tiny, but it's just a little bit further detail in terms of where you've got slight pressures. So actually just in your one, in this particular building, that top line is grounds and sites. So essentially that's the only piece that's really extending beyond its useful driveway issues, things like that. Again, are they very high priority? No. When we're looking at quite a fiscally conservative investment, we've got to make sure that we're maximizing what the long-term impact of that investment is going to be. And so a driveway doesn't really have a return on investment. High school, very similar picture. Again, you've got about an eighth at this stage in alert and alarm. We do have a large swathe in caution. Again, Nick, if I'm incorrect on this, but most of those caution items are at the longer lifespan of caution rather than the shorter. So again, is there a justifiable need for fixing some of these things? Yes. Could you absolutely get away with pushing some of these further down the line? 100% yes. Again, I think you've done a really good job maintaining that building. The middle school is obviously where that picture changes, and you can see now we're at 90% in caution alert alarm, with a lot of the infrastructure being significantly beyond its useful life, including the interior finishes, a lot of the HVAC pieces. You've got some very significant investments coming up just to maintain that building in a useful fashion. And so justifiably, is it better to put money into that or into a new addition, which helps you right size? It's your decision. But certainly I think it makes more sense to look at what is the better long-term strategy for this. In terms of that middle school, keeping the middle school open, the aging building is going to require significant investment just to remain operational. You are still limping along with it. It's still not going to meet ADA requirements. It's still going to have security issues. It's still going to have infrastructural issues. And it's going to continue to cost you money until such point as it's probably uninsurable. We looked at a 5-year cost projection on the low side in terms of the infrastructure that we expect in that next 5 years. We're looking at about $9 million. At the moment, it's costing you about $90,000 a year in terms of utility costs. Again, it's a much bigger building than you need in order to service the students that you have. So over the next 5 years, you're talking about, without inflation, probably about $500,000 a year, or $500,000 in terms of utility costs. As we expand that out over the next 10 years, we're talking about an additional 10 to 15 million. So, conservatively, you're talking about somewhere around 20 million in the next 15 years, or 10 years in that building, just to really keep it moving along. Some of the anticipated major upgrades: replacement of the critical systems near the end of the lifespan, continued maintenance just to maintain it and repair it, You've got some structural issues, and then again, compliance with evolving building codes becomes progressively harder in that particular. Questions about the middle school and infrastructure? We have Nick here. Anything that's coming to mind? I'm probably calling out the elephant in the room. I think we all know that that building is.
You mentioned eventually being uninsurable. Can you, Tom, maybe can you add the stresses of the insurance and maybe tie that with examples of, are there schools that can't be insured? What's that looking like? Because I know people are here to see this.
We were almost uninsured for this building in the middle school beginning January 1 from our current carrier. And Nikki was more involved in the conversations regarding that, so.
They came back with a non-renewal for those two buildings and had to go out basically essentially on the market to try to see if we could find anything else, which was substantially more expensive. They came back with giving us not a replacement cost for insurability, but an at cost of what it's currently at. So we lost coverage significantly, and we also increased it about $30,000 more just to keep coverage on. And that would only extend us through July 1 as of right now. If we have to go after July 1, they will reconsider it. But the chance of them not insuring us even at that risk is
high.
more likely.
Yeah, and we've seen this as a trend, certainly in the last few years, with a lot of certainly older rural districts, whereby insurance companies are just saying, hey, we're not going to cover this until such time as these works are committed. So it is something that I think is going to become more and more prevalent, especially as we experience more severe storms. You know, I know certainly in my area, I've had multiple people knocking at my door trying to get me to have a new roof, and you know, it's just that constant pressure on insurance companies. So it is something that we're expecting to see.
So we went from approximately $90,000 a year to $120,000 for significantly less insurance.
Correct.
On our two oldest buildings.
And that was with putting additional features in. We had to upgrade an electrical panel system. We had to do some things on just for them to give us that policy right now, which came at an expense.
Yeah, I'm meeting that exactly. Requirements on other ones. You know, if you have electrical distribution that's beyond a certain lifetime, they won't do it. We've seen roofing requirements, we've seen tuck pointing requirements, window replacement requirements. So it's becoming harder and harder to uphold this. And of course, in addition to a new building, it would be much cheaper and much easier to complete.
Did you say the increase was just for the admin building and then the middle school? We're not even talking about the insurance costs for the high school.
Well, the high school and the elementary school are in actually very, very good shape.
Right,
And
so these costs of $120,000 is just for these two buildings.
Property insurance.
That was overall, but that was
Correct.
the increase because of these two buildings,
Oh.
was that additional.
Oh, that is overall
Yes.
cost?
Yes.
But an increase because of this, of 30,000.
And we had to fix some things in order to get
Right.
insured.
Just
And we
to
have
get
less
insured.
coverage.
Correct.
So we're paying more for less coverage at this point.
Correct.
And
There
we've
were
had to
several
put
other-
money into fixing things.
Right. Several other points, like wind and hail damage was excluded. We had conditions as far as how old some of our replacement things were when they would replace. There were a lot of other factors that came into them even giving us this coverage that played a part of that. So significantly less coverage for more money.
And we'll be doing the same thing in May and June.
Well, I was just gonna say, and it's only good until July. And then
Correct.
they probably say the same thing.
Right.
Any other questions about the infrastructure for the middle school?
Nope, good.
Okay, all right, so with that in mind, I'm going to introduce Ryan Graham, who I know you guys met on our last board meeting Zoom call. Ryan's really looked at what different architectural ideas and opportunities exist in order to put into reality what the recommendations are from the community task force. So I'll let Ryan just kind of talk through some of his thinking with this. Again, with everything in mind to try and reduce your overall operating costs?
Yeah, so thank you. Our team spends a significant amount of time taking a look at all of their buildings from an architect's perspective. So looking at the roofing and the sidewalks and the windows and the doors, the interior finishes, just thinking about how the building functions as a school in our current date. We take a lot of look at your ADA compliance, we look at your code compliance, how are the buildings fire separated, et cetera, to figure out what types of impacts we may have with different potential improvements to the building. Another thing we take a big look at, especially when the conversation begins to talk about closing a school, is what is the current capacity and utilization of your buildings. So we look at 3 of your buildings in this chart here. What are the grades served? How many students are enrolled? What is maybe that target class size for that group of students? And those numbers can flex up and down based on what your district's unique goals are. But so at the elementary school, we're looking at potentially 18 students per class being kind of a target ideal. Middle school being 25, and high school again 25. You can see the utilization at the elementary school. I don't think it would surprise anybody that's been to that building is high, so we're over 100%. We'd like to see a number between 80 and 90. 85 is kind of the sweet spot. As you look at the utilization at the middle school and high school, it's quite low. We have a lot of room there based on the data set that we're looking at to move some students into that building. And that's relatively important as we begin to look at what that community task force recommendation of closing that middle school building is the data supports that the high school can take on some additional students. Even moving that grade 5, 8 into the existing square footage, we're still looking at a utilization lower than that current elementary school. I want to walk through some potential improvements at both buildings that we've kind of taken a look at and studied, how we can improve utilization capacity at both of those buildings while taking a look at closing that elementary, or at the middle school, excuse me. So option A at the elementary is looking at a small addition in that top right-hand corner. So extending that corridor, adding what is 4 classrooms, and then some additional restrooms and mechanical to support the additional square footage. Then on the front of the building, expanding the cafeteria. We know there's a lot of pressure in the dining spaces. Again, anytime we're adding extra square footage, we need to add restrooms. And then adding on that facilities and receiving area that's currently not adequate in that building. So that will support the receiving for the food services, but also provide some storage. One of the things that is maybe different between looking at adding on at the elementary or the high school is neither building is sprinkled, but because of the fire separation at the high school, we have a little more flexibility. In this building, if we're doing an addition or a significant alteration, we'd have to sprinkle the entire building. So that's a pretty significant cost when we look at a building that does not have sprinkling and fire suppression in it today. That's one of the challenges of this building. And that would be something we'd have to look at in either option A or B. Option B is just a larger addition. It would allow us to actually bring 5th grade students up to the elementary school building, or down to, excuse me, and still improve that utilization. Again, still looking at sprinkling of that building, but it doubles the classroom. So instead of 4, we're looking at 8 classrooms, some additional collaboration spaces, bringing back that maker space, project lab that the community task force discussed. So it just allows for a better learning environment that can hold additional students within this building. The improvements to the front remain the same in both option A and B. It's that cafeteria expansion, additional restrooms, and that shipping and receiving area to support the food services. Any questions on either option A or B before we move on to the high school? So let's start with the site plan. So when looking at additions to the high school, I mentioned the buildings not sprinkled. The addition that was done was 15, 16 of the auditorium. That portion of the building has a fire separation, 2-hour fire separation, and it is sprinkled. So if we locate the addition and access the addition from that addition, then we don't have to sprinkle the existing. We took a look initially at looking at expanding on the 3 existing wings on the west side of the site. We looked at going up with an addition as a second floor above the existing square footage. The challenges with any of those options is that probably somewhere in that $2-3 million just to sprinkle the existing facility. If we look at putting an addition out on the east side, where that blue box is shown, we can avoid that expense to the district with the addition. So with that addition, there are some alterations that need to be made to parking, pickup drop-off aisle. We want to replace some parking with that addition. Obviously, if we're bringing up 4th and 5th grade students potentially, we probably want to have some outdoor play space with the playground. So those are all accommodated with this plan, either option A or B. We'll jump into the high school option A. So this is going to be the smaller of the two additions. We're going to look at the main level first. So we're zooming in, I can't point, but that long yellow extension would connect to that existing auditorium hallway. So expanding to the east of that, we'd have the gymnasium, the locker rooms, mechanical spaces to support the new square footage. The purple box is that administration space next to the main entrance. We have meeting spaces, staff collaboration rooms, 4 classrooms on this level, so special education space, and then our vertical circulation, so 2 stair towers and an elevator to access the 2nd floor. And largely the 2nd floor is a mirror image of what's below, but we have admin spaces and a few spaces we don't need to replicate, so we can have additional special education spaces, additional flexible classroom to support that student population. The idea with option A, and Michael chime in, we probably could bring in 5th, 6th, potentially 7th grade students into part of this learning environment, and be looking at moving likely 7th and 8th into what is the existing high school. So the elementary school population would remain the same with option A, serving pre-K through 4. I'll jump ahead to option B, and then we can field questions if there are any. Largely the footprint is the same, the gymnasium, locker rooms, mechanical, the administration spaces, the restrooms remain the same, really adding on 4 additional classrooms per floor. This adds on additional collaboration space, we can have more meeting rooms because we have a little more square footage to circulate through. And again, 2nd floor, largely the same, just 4 more classrooms, a little bit more square footage. This option B would allow you to bring 4th grade and 5th grade students on the one level, 6th and 7th onto another level, and then put the 8th grade students in with the high school in sort of a collaborative area for them. But that also alleviates pressure on the elementary school because we pull 4th graders out. So that's one big advantage of option B. Any questions on site plan, either of the options at the high school?
So if you pull 4th grade out and go with this option at the high school, then you don't need to do any expansion at the elementary school, or we do?
So we pull that utilization down below 100%, so it's still in the 90s. So it's still maybe slightly more than we'd like to see, but it certainly alleviates that pressure. It helps significantly in the food service line, pulling the 70 or 80 students out for that grade level. We could look at doing small additions like a cafeteria expansion, but that still triggers that sprinkling. So any small project still comes with that big $2 million roughly price tag. So that's why it becomes a challenge to do something small there and the addition of the high school, just because of those code compliance improvements.
And one of the things that we really wanted to be considerate of is, given the investment, maximizing how much of that is student focused.
Mhm.
You know, by adding a little bit more cafeteria space, well, having to spend $2 million just to sprinkle the building doesn't feel like it's the right impact to students, except in a fire, obviously. But what we want to make sure is that, you know, we're relieving that pressure and maximizing the investment from the community directly into how it affects students. Other questions on these options? The other thing I will say is these are conceptual, right? So until such point as a referendum is decided upon by you guys and supported by the community, they stay as conceptual plans. You know, the actual footprint of it, the actual space utilization, it is all up for conversation and discussion once we enter into the design stages on the successful room.
Certainly, and and I didn't mention that, I apologize, but really, it's to get us to make sure that the space will support the students you have, gets us to a square footage so that we can apply a cost to it, so you can make that decision. You know, after a successful referendum, our design team will spend, 8, 10, 12 months with your staff members to really figure out what this space looks like to best serve the community and the student population. So this is by no means a design ready to go to construction.
Thank you.
So again, coming back to what's the goal and what's the outcome for tonight, is to try and get to a point of deciding what's that potential budget. And without really understanding what you'll get from numbers, it's difficult to make that decision. So what I wanted to do is just take a look at what some of the costs are associated with those potential opportunities. So that smaller classroom addition, which would give you the capacity to put 4th and 5th grade in, move 7th and 8th into the high school building. It would have a gym, it would have the classrooms for that space utilization. We're talking about 16.1 million. In terms of what's the negatives from that one, well, the negative is it doesn't address the space issues at the elementary school, and it doesn't, minimal enhancements to the available space. So it's a smaller step on that journey rather than a larger step. In terms of the second option that Ryan put together there, so again, coming with the gym, but now we have enough classroom space there to move 4th grade up from the elementary to reduce the capacity issues that you have there. It would give you enough space for 4th, 5th, 6th, potentially 7th, maybe even 8th, depending on how you use that space. Or you move 7 and 8 or 8 into the high school. At that stage, it gives you an awful lot more options, it gives you an awful lot more flexibility, and it essentially one building addition affects 2 buildings. So there's a lot more benefit to this. The downside is obviously it's a bigger addition, it comes with a higher cost. So in terms of that, that's 22 million. There is a third option with this, which is, well, thanks Michael, thanks Ryan, and thanks Nick. These are, the options that you've created, but we know that there is a number that our community is prepared to support, in which case we say that's what the number is, and then Ryan's job becomes maximizing the space that we can do within that potential space. The community essentially helps you select what that number is, as they have done with the survey, and then our facilities team actually put that plan into place based on that budget. So, let's talk about tax impact and relativity. The community engagement task force touched on this a little bit, but I just wanted to spend a bit more time on this. So, your municipal advisors, BED, who are wonderful to work with, help put together some tax impacts on different investments. This is the table that was included in that survey. That survey is a cold survey. So there's no narrative to it, there's no story, there's no need. It's literally just saying, would you be prepared to support X amount based on whether you thought it was a valuable investment? As we went through that, 55% of people would support a $14 million investment. As we saw in the survey, the 55 to 64 age range was the least supportive in terms of that. They were settling in around 10 million, and then some of the other demographics moving up into that kind of 18 million mark. In terms of tax impact on an average home, taking 150,000 as a taxable value, a $10 million investment would be somewhere around $3.87 a month, all the way through to 22 million being about 8.75. So, if we consider, I'm going to just skip around a little bit. If we consider those 2 different options, so option A, that smaller addition, would equate to about a $6.33 tax increase. So 16 million essentially equates to about $6.30. In terms of your mill rate, it still keeps your mill rate significantly below state average, but it would put it up to 664. In terms of the second option at that 22 million mark, then we do see a little increase in terms of the tax impact, At this stage, we're talking about $865 a month on an average home, with the mill rate sitting at $682. Again, still significantly below state average, but obviously we need to be very mindful that it is a tax increase. In terms of your mill rate, you saw this chart a little bit ago. Your mill rate has declined over time. Part of that, as the community task force talked about, is because as a district you carry zero debt in terms of building enhancements. So as that's dropped off over the years, your mill rate has decreased. Okay. In terms of the mill rate, what would be the effect of it? Because we talked about 14 million, somewhere in that 660 mark, 18 million, somewhere around 670. State average at the moment is 714, so it's still a long way below that. Oh, wrong way again. Let's do some comparison. Again, it is your district. Comparing against other districts does very little other than just give you a picture. You know, ultimately you've got to choose what the mill rate is for your district, and then the community's got to support that. But as a comparison against other districts in your neighboring areas, Wisconsin Dells is the next one up there at 643. Nakusa. Correct me if I'm saying any of these wrong because of my British accent.
It's our friends from Nakusa.
Nakusa. and then at the top there is Mawson. And I think we're all familiar with what's happening, right? And the struggles that they're having, despite having a mill rate that is very significantly above where you guys are. So from a tax relativity standpoint, you're in a good spot. Obviously, any investment that you put forward to a bond, you have to be cognizant of what that impact's going to be. But there is space against those neighboring districts. Okay. Questions on any of the finance pieces? Go.
It's not a question exactly about the finances, but has anybody indicated on the surveys that they are not interested at all?
Oh yeah. So that's in fact, if I jump back,
About 30%.
In red, that you
Please
can
show.
shift
I
in that
can't
bar
see
graph.
that.
I'm just going to see if I can quickly drop that out. Yeah, so in this particular graph, this is broken down by demographic, age range. So 24% of the age range 25 to 34 said that they're not prepared to support a financial investment. Interestingly, almost polar opposite to the same age range who said we're prepared to support more than 22 million. So really split in terms of that. Much the same with 35 to 44. So your largest one is 55 to 64, where they said, no, we're not prepared to support. Again, I'll preface this by saying there is no narrative to this. The reason that we do that survey cold in the beginning is to get a baseline. Hey, we're not going to tell you why we need it. We'll give you some indications of some things that we're aware of, but would you be supportive? And then once we've got this, we know kind of where that baseline is. And we know that typically, once we tell people the reason and what the investment is for and how it's best for the long term, we know that we can move some of those people. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? This is a great one.
Michael, can you just repeat how much you said? I know that you talked about the energy efficiency in order to maintain the middle school right now and what that would look like over 20 years. But when we talked about, this addition at the max 22 million, to make the middle school where we can continue to limp along and just make it where it's accessible for the next 20 years, what impact would that have as a dollar amount so people are aware?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'll be 100% candid. Could you get away with not putting any money into that building? Yes. But what you'll see is the building will continue to decline and the cost for getting it back to a state where it's usable will just continue to increase. You know, for every year that this decision gets pushed, you're talking about seeing another 5, 7, 8% increase just in the cost, let alone the other things that continue to get bad. So from the perspective of that middle school, in the next 5 years, spending somewhere in that $9 million range just to kind of keep it going would keep you in the status quo, right? In the next 10 years, then you're talking about probably about 20 million without really improving the building, but just keeping it as it is. Utility-wise, it's an old building, old equipment. It's not an efficient building. So, you know, spending $90,000 a year from a utility standpoint is pretty expensive, and you're heating an awful lot of building for only 50% capacity usage. So again, by right sizing that into an addition, you're looking at reducing that overall utility spend just by the nature of it being half the size even. And then you're also reducing the insurance costs. You're reducing the fact that you're just spending money to maintain status quo as opposed to actually improving, you know, the experience of your students and the operating costs of the district. So,
Yeah, and although you say that we don't have to do anything, if one of those air handlers go, we do have to replace that. So just so everybody knows, we can't just not put any money into it.
Safety would also be a feature by trying to hang on to that. It would not get any better, worse.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions? Okay. I'm going to flip back to where we were. So this is essentially what you can get for different budgets. 16 million for a small addition that would allow you to vacate the middle school, maybe not in an ideal fashion, but it would allow you to take a step on this journey. 22 million in terms of reducing the capacity issues at the elementary, getting an intermediate school set up at the high school with its own entrance, its own feel, and enough space, again, where you can be providing the good pedagogy that you require. There is a third option with this, which I just wanted to put out on the table, which is that, again, you consider it as a community in terms of that investment. You go to them with two potential questions. Question one being, we could make it happen with this smaller addition, but if you support adding some additional classrooms to that one, now we can actually reduce that problem with the elementary, and we can best serve our middle school and high school students. So in this instance, this would be asking your communities to support $6.33 a month in terms of building that first addition, and a second question for an additional $2.32 to support adding more. That way you're really giving the community the best possible options with this, which is, here is our absolute need, bare minimum, this is what we need to do in order to fix the problems that we have right now. But this would be really nice if we could have this, and it would also really enhance our students' journey as they go through that. So I wanted to pitch that as a potential thought process. Again, we're not looking to necessarily make a decision on that tonight. I just wanted to put it as a potential option. Thoughts, reactions? Nobody's sworn at me yet, so. Mandy, what's your suggestion?
Obviously, we need to do something. I mean, I don't think having either the middle school or this building makes sense from an educational standpoint or a fiscal standpoint. I actually like the idea of asking the two questions because I think it really gives people some options and some choice with regard to really what is that threshold. I mean, nobody wants their taxes raised. I don't either. but I also don't wanna pay $10 million plus to maintain a building that's really not meeting our needs at all.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'm really thinking, come July, we're gonna have no choice, because we're not gonna be insurable.
Yeah, and, one of the other things to consider is, realistically, even if this passes in April, should you choose to go to that, we're talking about a construction window starting in 26, realistically, this isn't something that's gonna happen overnight, right? So, in that worst case scenario, what do we do if these buildings are uninsurable? Well, we need to shorten that window as much as possible. The second thing is just, what's the damage of failing this, right? If we ask too much of your community and we fail, now the next time we have the opportunity to realistically ask is 26. Well, now we're another year, 22 million becomes 24 million, and again, the tax impact just becomes higher and higher. So I think anything that you can do in terms of, hey, we are asking just for the needs in terms of a way to right-size the buildings, reduce operating costs, provide a better service for our students, and we're really asking you to get behind that need, but also the additional one that would be to best serve your kids. Other thoughts?
Just a thought, with the elementary at 108 utilization percent, I mean, that's gotta be fire. I mean, if there was a fire there or any type of community emergency, I mean, that's gotta be bad.
Do you want to cover that one? I mean, from a code compliance, you're okay. Yeah.
Yeah, from a code compliance, it's fine. It's really looking at, every building has a different amount of it that's learning environment, circulation, mechanical. So we're looking at only the learning environment space based on how many students you have, and looking at target class size and numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And the best one in an ideal world, how many students would fit in these learning environments. So it doesn't dive into the code compliance or the life safety portion of it. More than adequate from a life safety code perspective. Yeah. But again, this building, efficiencies of how much space is for learning environments varies across buildings. So really different data sets.
Yeah, it means really that you're running those classes with more kids in it than is ideal, and again, bringing that down so that doesn't feel like it's so pinched would be a really huge benefit. And when that enrollment does plateau, then you do have the space that you need to best serve K-3.
I don't know if you covered it, but now with the additions on the high school, I think you said there were 2 different options of how many classrooms, but that was based on how many students per classroom. Like if we were to have a bunch of families move in with a lot of kids and, and it was, 8-10 years down the line here, how many kids would we be able to house, not based on the numbers of what we've got now, which are declining, but what if the numbers went the other way?
Well, first off, that would be a wonderful.
It would be wonderful.
Because as the task force went through, a lot of your finances is based on enrollment, right? So if you did see a huge growth in terms of students, the appropriate funding is coming with that to support it. In terms of those additions, that first one is going to be tight, right? That is really going to be, we can get 5 and 6 up here, and we would have to put 7 and 8 into the existing high school. The existing high school, you're at a 40% utilization rate. You have the space in that building for a lot more kids, right? There is even the potential to maybe rehouse some of the district services in there. You'll notice that we haven't presented anything despite the task force saying we should close this building down, because again, the cost of replicating this space, it's going to be a lot of that potential budget that your community is prepared to spend. And with the greatest regard, I don't want to go into to you as administrators, I want to go into the students in terms of fixing those overall costs. So the cost of closing this building doesn't make financial sense at this stage. That doesn't mean that it can't happen down the line, but in the first instance, we've got to put the students first in terms of this investment. The second one would give you enough capacity. The second option, so option B, would give you enough capacity, and especially if you moved 8th or even 7th and 8th into the high school, that would give you ample amounts of room for servicing the students that you currently have, as well as a lot of special ed services, English as a second language services. That would give you a lot more flexibility. But again, it's coming back to what is the community like for this sport? Those three questions, right? What's right for students, what's right for the community, what's right fiscally? Justin, what's going through your head?
I don't know, it's just a lot to process. I guess, what are our next steps from here?
Okay. I like that. We can transition on to the next one. All right. So, tax tolerance versus project reality. Survey results say that the community is likely to support 14 to 15. That's that cold number we're talking about. We know that given the right scope, given the right information, we can move that number. But we can't move that number from here to 30, right? We can potentially move that maybe 10, 15%. So somewhere in that 16.5, 17 it would be expected. And then again, giving them the option and the rationale behind that second question might even be able to move that number further. The project scope is likely to exceed this, right? We've looked at just those high school additions. We haven't looked at spending money in other fashions because at the moment, your infrastructure needs are pretty good. But at some point, in the next 10 years or so, they're going to have to be on your radar. How do we bridge this gap? So how do we bridge this gap? Right? Well, a lot of it comes down to, is it the right plan? Do we answer those three questions correctly? And then how do we put that narrative out there to make sure that people understand what, you heard it from the task force, right? These are guys that have had all the information, can see it now through your eyes and your lens, and they've come up with this recommendation. Our job is to help the community understand it from that same level of complexity. And then the last one here is really, it's been in the back of our mind the whole time. How do we reduce the future community pressure? You guys went out to an operating referendum last year. There's a huge difference between an operating referendum and a capital referendum. Unfortunately, anything that you do with your buildings, you have to go out through this referendum process. You can't just budget for it. It's not feasible. In Wisconsin, this is your only mechanism for doing these sorts of enhancements. But we need to be cognizant that there's always that pressure on the community. So everything that we've looked at has been about how do we reduce your overall pressure on the community. If we're going to ask them to invest in this, does it have a good long-term return on it? And we believe it does. So, questions to consider, and we talked about some of these. What is that referendum number that the community is prepared to support? How does the financial information today, in terms of tax relativity, mill rates, they're all just numbers, but they form a picture, right, of where you are as a district. How do they help inform your decision making? What do the community survey results tell you about tax tolerance? And then, tonight we're not having to decide on which plan we want, but how does seeing what you can get for those different budgets kind of, again, inform you in terms of what that number should be? And then the last bit, Justin, as you lead on to this, is time to decide, right? Tonight, our job is to come up with what do we think is the right number, and between now and next week, we can sharpen the pencils again. If you come back with a number that fits within those budgets, great. We can expand on some of those thoughts. If we're, if we're happy with some of the options that we've already presented, it becomes a much easier decision. How important is passing it? It's critical. It's absolutely critical that you get this. Knowing that we can't do everything, what has to be done, and again, I think we've been really cognizant of trying to minimize those has-to-be's. What are your thoughts from that community presentation? I thought they did a brilliant job tonight. where's that upper limit, and have we answered those 3 questions? And this is the bit where you guys get to engage in conversation.
What gives us ideas, definitely gives us ideas of what we have to, you know, the perspective of what it's gonna take just to stay in that middle school is throwing back money, good money at something that's never gonna sustain us for the next 30 years.
So is it right fiscally? No, right? So we can rule it off the table.
Kinda like when I used to milk cows, you know, it's that cow that you should get rid of, you're never gonna make her purebred again, but you need to send her down the road. Get a new one, you know.
Making me sad.
Yeah, that's just how it is.
Poor Betsy.
He's talking my language, so.
Yeah. It's, yeah.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, in the survey, I know you touched on whether people are parents or not.
Yep.
I don't remember, was there a question of whether or not the person worked for the district?
Yeah, school district employees is one of the demographics that we have within there too. Tom, we didn't like segue that one, but we certainly. Oh, if they're a school district employee or not was one of the questions, and they.
We did not disagree, we can, but we did not present it tonight, but we have that data, we could desegregate by employee.
What's your follow-up on it?
I would just be interested in seeing, you know, some of the support, if there's any differences between someone who works in the school versus not.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to break now?
Well, not this very second, Tom, but I know you can see it. Yeah.
Not gonna promise.
He's Johnny on the spot.
Yeah, right. My experience has been district staff typically are more supportive because they're in those buildings, they see it, they see the problems firsthand. Much in the same way as the community becomes much more supportive once they see those same things too.
Right, I know you said there was 400 and some respondents. I don't know how many school staff, like.
Oh, what percentage?
Right, I mean, if 100 school staff didn't support it, that's very much sway.
Oh,
I can't get access to it right at the moment.
We can certainly send it out.
Yeah, I could absolutely run that tomorrow and follow up with an email.
Nobody's prepared to say a number.
Well, I like your option of 2 different, you know, having potentially 2 different questions to ask. You know, okay, this will get us by, but this would get us, you know, to what we need to set us up for the next 30 years completely. And that's, I mean, something that we discussed with Tom when he got hired, you know. We need to set this district up for the next 30 years that we're sustainable. We got facilities that are gonna be here that are in good condition. You know, if we spend 15 million just to maintain a middle school, that's coming out of our, more or less our general fund to maintain that. Well, that's pulling it out of educating kids.
Yeah, and I even argue to say that's not even feasible anyway.
Right.
So you're still going to have to go out and ask the community to support something that you just know in the heart of hearts is not a good investment into that building.
And if you can avoid future referendums, capital referendums in some way, it's better to do it in one basket than 2 or 3 down the road in the same time limit.
Yeah, 100%. Again, bearing in mind, we've got to pass it, you know, so I think giving options to that varying level of support, I think, you know, again, it helps you right size, it helps you get the operation cost down, which does mean that it's less, there's going to be less strain on the operational budget to go out to another operating referendum. Go on, Bobby.
Well, unfortunately, because I mean, obviously, the middle school has a lot of history for our community.
Yeah.
I mean, I graduated from there myself. But at the same time, putting out a lot of money in maintenance costs and maintaining the building is money that's being taken out of our budget. And that money consequently then is being, you know, we went already for a referendum so that we would have the money to be able to keep the schools going. And we went for, I believe, wasn't it 3 years?
4.
We went for
We're
4,
in
but
the
we
sec-
went less money on the second time around. for
Correct. We're in
That
the
same 4 years. So since then, the cost of electricity, heating, busing, fuel costs, food, I mean, everything has gone up.
Insurance.
And so that money that we got before, you know, obviously is not going to last the amount of time that we needed it to do. Overhead costs on the middle school is making it harder, so I have to agree with you, Jim, that I just can't see us financially, as far as a community, being able to keep the middle school. I mean, what happens to this building here, that's here nor there, but the money that it's costing to maintain that in utilities and such is really high. I mean, it's outrageous, actually. I
And,
mean, we sit there and we complain about our electric bill when we get it, and it's over $100, you know, we're talking, you know, thousands of dollars. I mean, that's really hard. I think you guys did a really nice job of showing options for both elementary and also the high school. I don't know when it comes to the dollar amount, I'm very leery with our community. Is it beneficial to have a referendum, find out where the community sits on it? And if it doesn't pass, you look at it the next following year? I understand your comment that by waiting to 2026, that $1 million price tag is gonna go up a couple more $1 million. You know, but it really, seriously, it still comes down to the community. I think the biggest thing though, overall, that to me seems important, is that whatever decision we make, we're not basing that decision on how many children we have right now in the school system. We really don't know what's gonna happen in the future. More people may want to leave the city life and come into the country for whatever reason, and we as a school district should be ready for that influx. I mean, I understand it could be a high pie in the sky, but if you put a lot of money into it and it's only accommodating the number that we have right now, then we're really not looking out for what that might be 30 years down the line. So that's basically where I stand.
Just noticed 14% of the survey respondents were district employees.
and what will happen to any of this if it doesn't go through? Where will we be then?
Well, we would have to make changes no matter what. I mean,
What's that gonna look like?
Our maintenance budget on an annual basis is around $600,000.
So some of those big ticket items come with 40, 50,000. I mean, you heard just a couple months ago that
$80,000 dishwasher.
a dishwasher, you know, so some of those big HVAC things that have surpassed their life expectancy, even now by 5-6 years, we're just waiting for them not to be non-functional anymore, and then we have to figure out where that comes. So those are some big ticket items that we have already surpassed their life expectancy, that we're just holding our breath right now.
Well, what was it prior, I think right before you got on, Laura, we did roofs at the high school, and that was what, 1.4 million?
Oh, it was,
Or 1.5?
wasn't 4, I believe, close to 4 million.
Or
It was
that?
4.2.
Yeah, it was crazy, the amount
I
we spent
think.
on, just on roofs.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of sections on that building. So,
Is there any concern, I guess, in all of your research going through our buildings, that if we add on any of our systems at the high school will ultimately fail faster? And that should also be updated You know,
Nick is so excited. 3.5-hour drive. He has to say something.
As far as the way that that addition would be constructed, it's likely on its own systems from the existing boiler and chillers, electrical at the main portion of the high school. So because of that, there shouldn't be a huge strain on any of the existing systems. Just based on Sean and his team's work of maintaining the existing systems itself, they're, in my experience, a lot better shape than I would have expected them to be for their age. So there's nothing, it's a massive concern, which is kind of why we lean towards the programmatic and architectural side rather than infrastructure items. So if there was something that was a big concern, I think we would have brought it up at this point. But for right now, I would say there's nothing that sticks out, and a future addition shouldn't cause any wear and tear beyond the normal usage of those systems in the building.
And one of the nice things in talking with Nick and when the engineers were walking through our buildings, both the elementary and the high school are in really good condition. And we've done a very good job of maintaining those buildings, doing preventive maintenance. And unfortunately, we haven't, I think for decades, paid as much attention to the middle school as we have keeping those other two buildings in good shape. I think that personally, and from what I've heard, I've been here 6 years, is that it's always, for the last 20 years, what are you going to do with the middle school has been a community conversation.
Well, we look like there's a question on the tip here.
No, it's just such a beautiful historic building just sitting there.
Yeah, agree. And I think one of the big questions your community is going to ask you is, what are you going to do with it? Right. And again,
But there's options. You go around the state, you see this happen in other communities where they have buildings that have been shut down schools, and they've made them they've been able to do things with them to show their historic value, or the community's value,
Yeah, in fact, a lot of districts have gone through the same process of having to right size, and so old buildings have been reutilized in lots of different ways. I know that there are organizations, there are developmental organizations who would be interested in buildings just like this. Again, the cost of demolishing that building is astronomical, and it's not directly student facing. Again, it's an investment that we would ask of the community for something that doesn't affect kids. I think that is a laptop. Yeah,
It's on, maybe it's getting.
Yeah. So I do think that is something that, and we'll work with the administration in terms of, between now and that referendum to potentially have a plan for what that building could be utilized for. Because it would be a shame to lose such an iconic part of your history as a district. But again, Bobby, talking to you earlier, I know that certainly there's a need for housing in the area. There's a need for other support, community support. So I think there are options there. It's just at this stage, I think the reason the investment's not been put in is, as a jigsaw piece puzzle, it's never quite fit. And you'd have to spend so much money to make it fit.
Tom, because I know that one of the aspects was having areas for sports and stuff, for changing and all of that. I mean, that's an extra cost unless part of the school could still be used for that. And is that separated? Like, can you put water in one part of the building and the other part of the building is not being heated? And
I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to ask the engineers how we could parcel off potentially the portion of the middle school that's closest to the football field, soccer field, and track, because we use that during athletic events. Nick, you guys goes to opposite ends of at football.
I'm trying to think of the way that the piping layouts and things are within that building. It's hard to know off the top of my head without building prints. I mean, it's certainly something that could be looked at, but you could look at adding supplemental or moving a boiler system or something of that nature, but without really diving into details, I can't say with any level of certainty.
And I went from Nick to Nick. I should have just said storm it. You use that other part of that building, right? For
Yeah, during the football games, the opposing teams would change in the locker room and we use that to go at halftime.
particularly if the weather's bad. So
So the dollar amounts here are not including any of that part of the situation. I mean, there's, obviously sports is important to the community.
we're still going to have to do some work to make either of these options, A or B, work.
Yes.
If that makes sense. You know, it's not going to be an instant fix to everything.
Okay, perhaps I can help push us through this. So in terms of those options that we talked about, I mean, how do we feel about just sending a two-question piece? That first one being 16, that second one being the additional 6 million to get to both of them. I mean, as a board, how do we feel about that as a decision?
I would be good with that.
Yeah.
I would too.
The question would be, what happens if the $6 million referendum passes, but not the 16?
Yeah. So in Wisconsin, either question can act independently, right? So as part of the information campaign, it becomes if question 2 passes, we can't do this with question 2. Question 1 is the lifeline. Question 2 is the bonus card after. We've run referendums in exactly that fashion before. As long as the informational campaign is adequate within it typically isn't problematic. But if that is the case, as a district, you can make a decision at that stage. You know, do we want to use that 6 million to move towards again that first step, or do we just not issue general obligation bonds and just don't enact it?
And how do you reach the community with something like that?
Great question. I have my community expert. Except for Tom's comment. That's right. How do we reach the community, in terms of this? So there's some pretty obvious things in the first instance. Website, social media, flyers, mailers, newspaper articles. We will be putting together presentations as well so that we can reach out into particular community groups. Again, open houses to explain why this is the plan and why it's in the best interest for the district. The biggest proponent and the biggest movement that we see is still face-to-face, and it's people in the community talking to other members of the community. You've got a group here who actively came to you and said, this is our recommendation. Again, that we take information so much better from our peers than we do from any other source. So, yeah.
The last, when we had the operational referendum, the first time it failed and the second time, the community, people in the community really got behind it the second time. And the difference, it was so visible in the community that what was needed and why it was needed.
Yeah, and you guys have got to put the voice to that too, right? As a school board, if this is something that you guys put through, and it's a decision that you guys are going to the community with, and we would be delighted to continue to inform you as much as possible as to all the information and likely questions that you'll get from that, and what are the answers to them. We have all spent hundreds of hours in the details of this, and you're just seeing the very tip of the iceberg. So we can happily show you how the sausage is made to use it. Other thoughts, questions? I don't want to be presumptuous, but are we getting to that stage where we're saying that option A and B in So in this format is what we want to move ahead with. And the reason I'm asking is because of the next steps. So, we have another board meeting set up for next Wednesday, which was to specifically go through the scope of work. But quite honestly, this is that scope of work. Option A, option B. If we're able to negate that meeting next week, it's very advantageous because our next step as a board is to have the resolution drafted by bond counsel, who will write the questions for the ballots, and then you as a board have to actually pass that as a resolution. That's you guys formally saying, these are the questions that we're going to take to the public. If we do next Wednesday, and you're looking to pass that resolution on Thursday, bond counsel have told us that it's not enough time to write those questions. So if you guys are comfortable with this, this would be the format for those questions, which you guys would then vote on.
On Monday. On Monday at our regularly scheduled meeting.
Yeah.
Because it also has to be filed with DPI, and so that is on my end. I have to do that part after we do the resolution. So it's a tight window by the 21st.
So if this is what you guys feel comfortable with, then I suggest that's what our charge would be to take back to bond council in terms of putting on the ballot. Jim, your board, how would you like to?
So a question, if both questions were on there, can you answer yes to both, or do you have to, would a voter have to choose one?
Nope. So it would be yes or no on question one, yes or no on question two.
So somebody could vote yes to both?
Correct. Someone could
Okay.
vote yes to both, they could vote no to both. In Justin's worst case scenario, they could vote no to question one and yes to question two, in which case we find ourselves in a bit of a pickle. But they act as independent questions.
Okay.
Well, we're not taking any action tonight,
Right.
but we could take action on draft resolutions on Monday if you were to instruct us to do so.
Right, so we would theoretically discuss that on Monday at our regular board meeting, then we would
Yes.
still have the Wednesday meeting, but the purpose would be slightly different.
Or
Is that enough time? I don't know.
We wouldn't have to have Wednesday's meeting.
We wouldn't
you know.
necessarily have to have Wednesday's meeting.
But then when are we voting on that? On
Right.
Monday as well?
So essentially, if you guys are comfortable with this, we can work with bond council to have these questions ready for your discussion and approval on Monday.
That seems to make the most sense.
Yes.
I mean, I'm a little bit hesitant because Jeff and Steve aren't here, but at the same time, they are aware of the issues and that sort of thing. It sounds to me like we have consensus. I don't think anybody's willing to throw out a dollar amount. So then, I mean, are we gonna sit here and think about that all night? I don't think so.
It would be hard for us to make that decision anyways. You know,
Right.
it really comes down to the community. They have to say yes, that they can see the importance of this. I mean, I know the community as a whole, there will be some that will say, let's throw the school board underneath the bus because they want to take this to a referendum. I mean, that's obvious, but it really should not be about that. It should be about if the community sees the need and what dollar amount that they feel comfortable with.
But what
But
will
we
be
have
on
to-
Monday will be dollar amounts.
We'd
There'll
have to
be
have a
a-
resolution
There'll be
to
a set
present.
dollar amount
Present
on
a dollar
Monday.
amount.
So it sounds
But
like,
the questions would be though on the ballot, right?
But the questions include the dollar amount.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
they include the dollar
So
amount.
as a board, you're basically just approving the question that we're
Yes.
going
Right.
for.
We have to
Approve
say,
the
yes,
question.
we want those questions to actually be on a ballot for a referendum, or no, we don't.
Correct.
Right.
And Michael, what you're saying is that first question would say the 16 million that would support moving these classrooms, and would you also support an additional 6 million that would allow us to bring fourth grade up?
Yeah, question one,
Okay.
dollar amount for the purpose of this. Question two, dollar amount for the purpose of adding additional costs, just see that addition. Yeah. And the language within there, we will iron out between now and.
Do you have to word it for the additional cost though, or couldn't you just word it with the two separate amounts?
They're two separate amounts. It's two separate distinct questions.
Right, that's what I thought,
Yeah.
which I think is less confusing than the additional whatever, because then that's like, well, what am I doing with that money if you're not doing the first thing?
Right, and then if you were to vote on this, then we would go into the public and talk to as many people as we can. We try to engage the community group. That made the difference the last time, and members of the task force as well, and tried to make sure people understood why we were doing this, what the purpose is, and how it's going to benefit our students and the community over an extended period of time.
Yep.
So I guess my last thought is, what does, the administrators that are here, you, Nikki, Crystal, Chris, Nick, like, what are your guys' thoughts? You've also sat through all of this. You work in the buildings. We're just like hearing the information. We don't work there.
On a personal level, and I think I will allow others to speak, Tammy as well. I think the middle school is an antiquated and outdated facility, educational facility. I think the people that work in the middle school would agree to that. I'm not trying to put words in their mouths. There's great things that happen in that building in spite of the physical space. And it's time that we move out of that space.
Sorry, I guess my question would be more of like the two questions, or do you think we just need to go for the higher amount right off the get-go? Like what do you?
Well, you have to be conscious of tolerance, and would I like to think that the $22 million question would be more advantageous? Yes, but I also look at the survey data and see that even a $16 million question is going to require a lot of educational work on our end with the community. So I'd like to make sure that we pass at least one of those options.
You think that if just the 16 million question would have passed, that would be an acceptable solution?
It would be,
It's
it
not
would
the
present
best-
some challenges.
It's not the best solution, but it would work without having to do all this other rigmarole.
It's
Correct.
better than what we have.
Okay.
Correct.
I guess, if you're like, we're gonna, you pass the $16 million, and now it's a headache trying to get everything else to work, then like, to me, that's not worth it. But if you're like, this would work without adding a whole ton of stress, but it's still not the best option, then I would say I'm on board with the two questions.
And I think for me, it would be doing the 7th and 8th grade in high school, in with the high school students. I would be more against that than just having the 8th graders there. I don't know. It's that age group where the mindset of the children when they're in 7th grade versus 8th and 9th grade. So
But I also think we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
We're talking about concepts, and we're also talking about how we have a mix of those age groups already in our middle school, and
Yes.
they're segregated. We have
Yes.
room in our high school to do the same thing, even if we move 7th and 8th grade in there. And I think the other important thing to note is if you look around in our surrounding districts, which are also smaller and rural, many of those have schools where they are all together. It's elementary, it's middle school.
Pre-K
and it's high
through
school.
12.
I work in a neighboring county and almost all of the schools are like that. So, right, they have things inside to separate that, so I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves about what the addition potentially is going to look like. I think if people have those concerns, we can say we are going to make accommodations so that, yes, 5th graders aren't hanging out with 10th graders.
Yes.
We already do that, we've already done that successfully. That's a secondary peripheral point. It's really, do we want two questions or we don't? And I like giving the taxpayers the choice because we're just suppositioning as to what their threshold is. At the same time, what the data is telling us is that 16 is probably going to be a stretch because if they've already said cold call 14 and we can estimate what I heard tonight is an additional 5 to 10%, well that's 16. That's our lower level. So, but again, we're taking in this data and we're guessing what the community's going to say. I think ultimately we need to give them the choice, and they're going to tell us what they want to do or not, and then we're going to have to live with whatever that answer is.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point.
Okay.
Well, and that's, oh, sorry, Tom.
No, go ahead.
Justin, if I can come back to you, that first edition is your bare minimum, right? It's not an ideal. In fact, to say that even the second option is still not your ideal, because there are other things, you're still going to have the sports facilities at the middle school, you're still going to have, some of that disjointedness. But it is the best option based on answering those three questions at this stage. And then, Mandy, to jump in the back of that one, I think by giving the community the option, I do think that moving the community survey data that we saw, now that we have the right narrative to it, 16 is probably a little stretch, but probably not massively. 22 is a stretch, right? There's nowhere to lie. 22 is a stretch. I think if we put all our eggs in that one basket, we probably end up in a thanks very much, but no thanks. But I think being considerate to say, hey, we've got to have this, but we really like you to support this. I mean, the tax impact is another couple of bucks a month, it's another $25 a year. It's not negligible, but I think giving people the option to say yes or no is.
I think it's important that they get the option.
Yeah.
I agree.
So with your permission, I'll work with administration to work with bond council to get those questions drafted, ready for your Monday evening meeting.
Okay.
I won't be able to be here on Monday. I'm in a different district. But we can, we'll have representation here, so that if there are questions.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you so much for a good chunk of time tonight. I know it's an exhausting process, so thank you so much for taking that on.
All right. Just a couple of things. First of all, the community task force people, thank you very much for your time, very much. And I know I've talked to Michael and a few others from SiteLogic. I think our administrative team in general has been very impressed with the work SiteLogic has done when we were kind of left hanging by the previous company that we were working with. So thank you guys all and we appreciate the time and the talent and effort that you've put into this. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure, and we're really hopeful that we can be successful with you guys to make a difference to your community. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
All right. Anything else, board? We are adjourned at 7:58.